Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous, and let's dive into a discussion on the escalating conflict in Ukraine. Overnight, both Ukraine and Russia launched major drone attacks, with Kyiv reporting significant damage. Meanwhile, top Trump officials are heading to Europe for high-stakes security talks. Let's find out a bit more. Ukraine's war front saw another night of heavy drone attacks. Russia launched 151 drones, with Ukraine's military claiming to have shot down 70. Damage was reported across several regions, including Kyiv. In response, Ukraine launched drone strikes on 8 Russian regions and annexed Crimea. Moscow says its air defenses intercepted 35 Ukrainian drones. Amid the escalating conflict, top Trump administration officials are heading to Europe for high-stakes security talks. Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will attend the Munich Security Conference, which will also be attended by Ukrainian President Zelenskyy. Meanwhile, Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth will participate in NATO defense ministers' meeting. We are joined by many guests today, one being Gilbert Doctorow, Russian affairs expert, live with us from Brussels. We're also joined by Professor Alexei Haran, Professor of Comparative Politics at the University of Kyiv-Molia in Kyiv, Ukraine. We're also joined by Adrian Kamamel, terrorism scholar and fellow at the Arabian Peninsula Institute, joining us from New York. And we're also joined by John Rossomando, president of Viking Research Associates and geopolitical analyst, joining us from Washington. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. John Rossomando, I wanted to start with you in this discussion. I wanted to start on the military operations to begin with. Russia claims to have destroyed 35 Ukrainian drones, and on the same night, Ukraine reports shooting down 70 Russian drones overnight. What does this increasing frequency and scale of drone tactics signify about the current state of military tactics employed by both sides?
Well, let's put it this way. The drones are the great equalizer in modern warfare, and the thing about drones is that they're low cost, they're easy to produce. A video came out over the weekend of Ukraine building drones in a top secret underground location. It's becoming the way of war for the 21st century. And in Ukraine, drones have become the center of the combat. You don't have to send air strikes from multi-million dollar fighters anymore. You just send in the drones. And the thing about drones is they're easy to replace. So this is seeing what warfare will look like from going forward.
Alexei Haran, Professor, President Zelenskyy confirms a new offensive in the Russian Kursk region, and he claims that North Korean troops are supporting Russian forces. How might Ukraine's offensive operations within Russian territory, such as recent actions in the Kursk region, impact the broader dynamics of the conflict and international perceptions?
Well, it's important for us, first of all, from psychological and symbolic point of view. So Russia appeared to be it's not possible for Russia to defend its own borders. So yes, it looks like Ukrainian symbolic victory. This is very important also from psychological point of view. Regarding military point of view, well, we actually do not know the aims of Ukrainian military command. More or less we can speculate on that. So the idea perhaps was, that Russians should withdraw some forces from Donetsk regions. As far as I know, they didn't do that, but nevertheless, a huge number of Russian troops is concentrated around Kursk area, which means it's not possible for Russia to attack Ukraine from the north. Such important cities like Kharkiv and Sumy.
Gilbert, Dr.
And by the way, it creates interesting situation for potential future negotiations, because some people and around Putin actually, and Putin himself, he told that Ukraine should recognize, he formulated it, de facto territorial situation in Ukraine. Okay, so he means that, okay, Russia occupied these territories and Russia would like to continue this occupation. But what will happen with Kursk? You know. So this is a question actually to Putin. Is he going to sacrifice Kursk region for Ukraine in all course?
Gilbert Doctorow, I want to leave you with that thought. Is Putin has said that he wants people to stop dying on both sides, and is this operation in the Kursk region on Russian land? How do you think this is going to go for Ukrainian soldiers?
We know how it's going for Ukrainian soldiers. It's more important how it's going for the widows of those soldiers. 57,000 Ukrainian soldiers have lost their lives or been permanently disabled as a consequence of this Kursk operation. If this is a public relations, more morale-lifting exercise, according to your previous panelist. But I don't know how much morale you can build among the widows of the 57,000 who died for nothing. And it's not as though the whole of Kursk region is occupied. It's something like 500 or 400 square kilometers today, which is a fraction of the size of Kursk. So to think that you're going to negotiate that against 20% of the whole land mass of Ukraine, which is Russia occupied today, is utterly delusional. To say that there is no progress on the front, that is the Donbas front, because the Russians are distracted by Kursk, is also an utter lie. Every day there's territory lost by Ukraine, and these are kilometers and kilometers daily. And these are 1,500 Ukrainian troops who die or are wounded for life in this struggle at the line of demarcation in the Donbass. The Russians are moving on the center of the Donetsk region. There are the obstacles that stood in their way. These strategic points have been either taken fully or are partially taken. Pakrovsk is in the sights of Russia, and that is the last significant fortified town and major distribution hub in Donetsk region. Therefore, the Russians have in their sights the Dnieper River. So the previous speaker is slightly lost in geography.
Professor,
I'm sorry.
Professor Alexei, I will let you add to it, but please be brief in your response, because I want to move on.
So I can take the floor, right?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So thank you very much. So first of all, I do not know where you took these figures. Then Ukrainian soldiers are fighting for the freedom of their country. This is very, very clear. And if we are talking about, Russian movement, you know that their initial aim was to seize Kyiv in 3 days. Now it will be the 4th year of the war, and they are not able even to occupy Donbas. Yes, the situation there is difficult, but Donbas still is not occupied. So if you say that I do not know geography, I just wonder where you're taking for your arguments, because I think you do not understand, you do not want to understand that we are dying for our freedom, and in this case you just repeat Russian propaganda, whether intentionally, non-intentionally, but basically you are repeating Russian propaganda, full stop.
Adrian, I just want to bring in, sorry, Gilbert Doctorow, I just want to bring in Adrian Calamel quickly and talk about the new reports of North Korean forces and what they reveal about Russia's global partnerships and willingness to bring in external support in the current state of the Ukraine war. And then I will let you respond, Gilbert Doctorow.
Yeah, it's very clear, and this has been the problem for a while since the collapse of the Soviet Union, that Russia's had a manpower problem when it comes to the battle space. And now they are experiencing that problem to a great degree. Ukraine, we have to look at their invasions in Ukraine prior to this. We have to look at how this taxed their Air Force, but the Syrian intervention, before that. And now you have them flooding the field, and this is a second call-up of North Korean troops. So they definitely have a fire problem, and it's growing more acute. And this is something that the Trump administration needs to take advantage of. The belief is that Putin will spill as much blood, and we'll hear narratives about the widows of Ukrainians who are fighting for nothing. But first, they lost their most industrialized region, and then Putin wanted to take the capital in 3 days. So they are fighting for something. They're fighting for something that the Western allies, and I think that's why Hegseth is in talking to NATO, is we need to work with our allies to forge some sort of collective deterrence, which has been lost for quite some time. Whereas you have Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, Caracas, Islamabad, all working together.
I want to move on to politics and diplomacy. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for that section. I want to talk about Trump's demand for access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals in return for US aid. World leaders have responded to this, including German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who has called it selfish and self-serving. John Rosamundo, is it appropriate for nations to seek economic or strategic advances for aid such as rare minerals in exchange for military aid?
I think absolutely. You know, it's kind of like we look at the state of the American government. We are $35 trillion in debt, and the United States cannot sustain the sort of Marshall Plan kind of economics of the past. So President Trump is simply saying to Ukraine, in exchange for us providing you with materials to stay in the fight, you need to provide us with economic resources so that it's something that is given in return, because we just can't afford to give things gratis anymore. It's not 1989, and the United States is not in the same economic and geopolitical state that it was at the end of the Cold War. This is a new day, and we have to face up with reality.
Professor Haran, I want to move on to you for this next one. What do you think of Donald Trump's statements or demands here? And could this set a wider precedent for an aid for resources agreements in future conflicts?
Well, first of all, this idea, to supply US with Ukrainian resources, actually, it was promoted by President Zelenskyy. I believe it was 2 months ago, and definitely it was, a step in order to reach Mr. Trump, whose approach is business-like, approach. So what Trump is saying right now means that both sides can negotiate on that. How it will happen, what would be the framework, we now don't know, because some of Ukrainian resources are actually now under Russian occupation, or they cannot be exploited because of the Russian war against Ukraine. But having said all that, I need to stress that actually, it's a unique case in world history when the country, Ukraine, gave up nuclear arsenal, the third largest in the world, and we received territorial guarantees from Russia, from the US and the UK, and then, all of it was violated by Russia. So definitely in Ukraine, we assume that the free world should support us, without talking about economic gains or something like that, because again, it's the thing which cannot, which we couldn't predict that may happen in the world and in the center of Europe. But if there is some economics involved economic interests, okay, let's consider it. Again, we do not know what would be the result of these negotiations.
Gilbert Doctorow, I want to move on to you on the same topic. Is it acceptable for a country to tie economic interests to military assistance?
If its aim is propaganda, yes. If its aim is business, no. This is all empty talk. There is nothing in Ukraine to talk about in these rare earth deposits, $16 trillion. That is just hot air to divert attention from the reality of the situation in Ukraine, which is dire. My friend doesn't like to pick up the New York Times or the Financial Times. He would find out every day about the Russian advances and the Ukrainian losses. I'm not inventing this, and I'm not telling you something from RT. Just pick up a mainstream newspaper. Now, as to the question of resources, Ukraine is not a new continent. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, which had a great tradition in extractive industry. These deposits, which they do exist, titanium and other interesting metals do exist in Ukraine, and some of them are presently being mined. But the most exciting ones, the ones that one speaks of for the $16 trillion estimate of net worth of Ukraine, they weren't mined for a good reason. They are difficult to extract in the present geological setting where they exist. There are countries around the world, like Chile and South America, that have such deposits which can be extracted profitably. Ukraine is not one of them. The Russians didn't mine that for a good reason. There was nothing worth mining. And talking about it now is an empty discussion. As I say, it's a propaganda point, like most of what my previous panelist was talking about in defending the Ukraine and its worthy causes. We're not talking worthy causes. We're talking the military situation on the ground, and it is not favorable to Ukraine.
Okay,
I do ask if we keep this conversation.
I need to say something.
Professor Haran, I will let you speak. I will let you speak. I just ask that we keep this conversation respectful. Professor Haran, please respond.
Okay, look, I am participating, I believe, for the third time with Mr. Doctorow in this kind of discussion, and I had a feeling, and still has this feeling, that he is very happy, of the, as he said, of the problems, of Ukrainian problems. So my question is to you, Mr. Doctorow, because you know the hard facts. Can you say that Russia is aggressive, and Russia violated all the treaties, and Ukraine is a victim of aggressor? Can you say that? Russia is aggressor. Can you repeat it? Russia is imperialist state. Can you repeat it?
I would love.
I believe there's nothing to talk about. If Mr. Doctorow cannot recognize that Russia is aggressor, which violate all the treaties which it signed, so we understand what is Mr. Doctorow's position. Unfortunately.
Okay, I would like to move on if we can. I want to talk about US-Russia communications. Adrian Kalamal, President Trump mentioned a phone call with President Putin about ending the war, claiming Putin wants to see people stop dying. Though the Kremlin has not confirmed this, just to be clear. What role should direct communications between the US and Russia leaders play in facilitating a resolution to the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
No, I don't think those direct conversations are going to facilitate anything. I think it's going to be eventually what will facilitate is when Putin feels enough pain. I have to disagree. They are feeling a lot of pain. Ukraine is not on the verge of collapse. When you're importing a bunch of North Korean soldiers, when you're importing a bunch of Islamic Republic drones, ballistic missiles, things aren't going for you well on the field. And what Trump needs to do is leverage that and make Putin understand that, you want to carry this on. We're gonna make it nasty for you, and you're going to have to sue for peace on this. And I don't think Putin wants to be there. U.S. has enormous economic and military leverage. We can use the economic leverage to put a further vice on an economic vice on Russia, on Putin's Russia, and we can also introduce different types of weapons, the type of weapons that make Putin a little bit nervous. And then also start talking about NATO membership again. If you got such a problem about this, bring up NATO membership and say, Putin, listen, the last straw here is you don't back out. It's immediate NATO membership once we resolve this thing. So there's multiple levers that we can use, that the United States can use. Putin doesn't want anything except for expansion. We've seen what he's done. I mean, it's a stalemate there. There's been thousands and thousands of dead on each side. bringing in other troops. He doesn't care about bloodshed. He's very Machiavellian in his approach.
John Rossamondo, I wanted to move on the relationship with Trump and Putin. Obviously, in Trump's first term, the two met up. Since a lot has happened, but how critical are direct leader-to-leader conversations in resolving conflicts when both sides have such deep mistrust?
Well, I think that you need to have direct communication to remove any possibility for things being misread. And throughout the Cold War, you had the Moscow to Washington hotline that saved us from having World War III. So I think that this is a way for President Trump to play hardball directly with Vladimir Putin, saying, hey, what Adrian was saying, if you don't do this, I'm going to make it so that your economy doesn't function. I'm going to go after Kazakhstan, China, and everything that you rely on to fund and to rearm your war machine. So anything that President Trump does has a more personal tone to it, where he can use carrots and sticks directly with Vladimir Putin, which Joe Biden didn't understand over the past 4 years.
Professor Haran, there has been talks of this happening, but how does Kyiv view the possibility of a US-Russia bilateral agreement potentially shaping the terms that directly impact Ukraine and possibly ending the war?
Well, we know that Mr. Trump said that on many occasions that he would like to stop the war. The question is, what are the conditions? Mm-hmm. Because we actually heard, I believe it was said by Mr. Rubio, that Russia is aggressive. Full stop. Mr. Doctor also. He said Russia is aggressive. The words that you cannot repeat for some reason. He said that we know who is good guy, who is bad guy. But then, he continues that both sides need to make compromises. So, the huge question for us, what are compromises? What kind of compromises? And this is really difficult, question where we are not sure what may happen. So we hope that Trump administration will pressure on Putin, but we don't know, what specific points of agreements would be potential points of agreements. And I believe Trump's administration now actually is in the process, of developing the plan. So they need to have more contacts in Europe with other countries, with Ukraine, with Russia, in order to create more solid position.
Gilbert Doctorow. Okay. Gilbert Doctorow, I was wondering if there's any public or governmental support within Russia for direct talks with the US that might bypass other diplomatic channels.
Well, talks are ongoing, and Russians know that, and the people around the Kremlin know that, and they're for a satisfactory negotiated settlement between the United States and Russia, which takes in a lot more than just Ukraine. The war started over NATO. That is what December 2021 was all about, the terms that Moscow gave to Washington to NATO to pull back to the 1997 posture before the expansion of the Clinton years and the next two administrations. The point is that as Mr. Ryabkov, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, said 2 hours ago, relations with the United States are at the breaking point. They have been in discussions, back channels to Washington. The plans that Mr. Trump has to use his great leverage, as my fellow panelists believe exists, was not well received in Moscow, because they know the reality. There is no leverage that is yet to be used by Washington short of starting World War III. Mr. Biden may have been senile, but the people who are actually running his foreign policy, Blinken and Jake Sullivan, were not senile, and they did the maximum destructive action towards Russia. They took the sanctions from hell that Victoria Nuland had dreamed up with her team, and they all were applied against Russia to no purpose. The sanctions on the shadow fleet oil tankers that Mr. Trump imposed a few days ago to show the kind of muscle that my colleagues thinks he has, that resulted in very negative readings in Moscow. It's not going to stop the Russian export of oil, as the same sanctions imposed on Iran a few days ago will not stop Iranian exports of oil. There is no leverage in Washington. And so long as panelists in the States believe there is, well, the only thing they're heading for is World War III.
May I say one word, which
yes,
is
of
really,
course,
really
Harran,
important? May I do that? Okay.
Yes.
So
very
it's
briefly.
very important to understand that before 2014, Ukrainians believed in friendship with Russia, and Ukrainians didn't want to join NATO. And our official status was neutral country, and we gave up our nuclear weapons. Mr. Dr. O, do you know about these facts? Why do you repeat this crazy lie about NATO on the territory of Ukraine? There are facts. We were a neutral country and we demilitarized ourselves. I'm talking about nuclear weapons, and Russia attacked. Full stop. No NATO involved.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We have unfortunately run out of time. Thank you very much, Gilbert Doctorow, Professor Alexei Harran, Adrian Camamel and John Rosamundo. We have unfortunately ran out of time. We will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world. Thank you very much.